On September 27th, a conflict broke out in the South Caucasus between Armenia and Azerbaijan. The goal of the fighting was to gain control over the territory of Nagorno-Karabakh, or as the Armenians call it, Artsakh. More than 6 weeks after the start of the fighting, on November 10th, the media informed about the ceasefire, which in fact means the end of the war and the victory of Azerbaijan. This is a good time to look at this conflict from a broader perspective and draw the conclusions that led to the fall of the Armenian Republic of Artsakh. Welcome to the 20th report. The Caucasian melting pot. Before we get to the specifics of the confrontation and current events, let's first outline the historical context of the whole situation. The area of the South Caucasus has always been a place where various ethnic groups, cultures, and religions met. For centuries, Armenians, Georgians, and Turkish peoples competed for influence in this area. The melting pot was made up of Orthodox Georgians, Armenian Christians and Catholics, Shiite Muslims in Azerbaijan, Sunni minorities, Yazidis, and many more. All this in an area about the size of half of Poland and with a population of 17 million people. Such diversity has always been the source of disputes. Current leaders go back 2,500 years in arguing their claims for territories. These lands were subject to the Armenian, Georgian, Persian, and Turkish empires. Yet in the last few hundred years, the Russians have had the greatest influence there. However, to understand the context of current events, we must go back at least 100 years. As World War I ends in 1918, Europe celebrates the end of the bloodiest conflict in history. However, at this point the Armenians are trying to shake off what could be called a prelude to the Holocaust. That is the Armenian genocide by the Turks. In the years 1915-1918, according to various estimates, they murdered between 1/3 and a half of the entire Armenian nation. The burden of those events and the fear for the nation's existence cast a shadow on the collective psyche of Armenians to this day. Yerevan, under the Treaty of Sèvres of 1920, received huge territorial areas reaching deep into Turkey, but the Turks quickly took back these areas. Without the intercession of the then world powers, Armenia, facing a much larger Turkish force, surrendered the war 5 months after its start, agreeing to all the conditions of Ankara. A few months earlier, there was a short war between Armenia and Azerbaijan over Nagorno-Karabakh, or Artsakh, as Armenians call it. Even though Armenia won and took control temporarily, it was a Pyrrhic victory at best. 20% of the inhabitants of Artsakh died, of which the vast majority were Armenians. Moreover, shortly after this conflict, Russian troops intervened and, as a result, the Soviets were to decide about the future of this area. Artsakh Nagorno-Karabakh. Artsakh covers an area of over 4,000 square kilometers and is inhabited by about 150,000 people. For the last 200 years, almost exclusively by the Armenians, for whom Artsakh is an area of almost mythological importance. For 400 years, the Catholicos of all Armenians, the head of the Armenian Apostolic Church, the Pope's equivalent for Catholics, was based there. Furthermore, it was one of the few areas where Armenians created their own landed gentry and their own self-government under the Persian rule. The Azeris also cite history demanding control over Nagorno-Karabakh. It was once an area under the jurisdiction of the Karabakh Khanate of Muslims. Tens of thousands of Azerbaijani nomads traveled the lowlands and mountains of Karabakh. So if this area fell under the jurisdiction of Armenia, it would be a disaster for them. Moreover, in terms of economy, Karabakh was much better connected with Azerbaijan. Most of the roads led east to Baku, not west to Yerevan. From Baku's perspective, however, the geostrategic argument is key. With no control over Nagorno-Karabakh, Azerbaijan finds itself in a very difficult situation in the event of a potential offensive from the west. Nevertheless, both sides, along with their arguments, remained at the mercy of the Central Committee of the Russian Communist Party. at least in theory, because in practice, the decision was made directly in the office of Joseph Stalin. On June 4, 1921, the Central Committee of the party, taking into account the victory of the Armenians a year earlier and the undeniable fact that the Armenians constitute almost 100% of the population of Artsakh, admitted this area to Armenia. However, a day later, Joseph Stalin intervened personally in this matter and placed this area into the Azerbaijani Soviet Republic. It was one of many similar decisions by Stalin, who by artificially dividing the territories in the Soviet republics, heated the existing conflicts, weakening the authorities on the empire's periphery, thus strengthening Moscow's power. We can still see the effects of these decisions today. Nagorno-Karabakh was part of Soviet Azerbaijan for the next 70 years. Despite the passage of time, the conflict did not die out but continued to smolder, albeit remaining mostly hidden. The Azeris gradually expanded their presence in the area, still dominated by the Armenians. The collapse of the USSR was the moment when Artsakh flared up again. In 1991, both Azerbaijan and Armenia declared independence. Armenian Nagorno-Karabakh also announced a referendum to obtain autonomy as an independent state. However, as it was not previously one of the separate Soviet republics, but only part of the Soviet Azerbaijan, it had no right to do so under the Soviet constitution. The vacuum caused by the absence of the big brother from Moscow inevitably contributed to the war. As a result, in 1992-1994, one broke out. In May 1994, Armenia controlled about 20% of Azerbaijani territory, which led to negotiations and a ceasefire moderated by Russia. A real result was the occupation of Karabakh by the Armenians and its 7 border regions and the creation of the Republic of Artsakh inside Azerbaijan. And it was between the Republic of Artsakh and Azerbaijan that the war of 2020 was officially taking place. This is a very important distinction. The High Porta challenges the Russian Empire. The confrontation in Nagorno-Karabakh may have appeared frozen since 1994. However, it was not the case. Both countries are officially at war, and this is the longest-lasting conflict on the periphery of Europe. Statistically, almost every day for 30 years, one person has been dying in this area, not counting the moments when the conflict heated up again. Thus, assuming large simplifications, we come to the present moment in 2020. The two nations once again faced each other to take control of the epicenter of the Caucasian cauldron. However, the cards at the disposal of both sides were completely different this time. In the recent decades, Azerbaijan has grown and reached in the trade of hydrocarbons, thus establishing its economic position in the region. The dry numbers also leave no room for doubt. Azerbaijan, with a population of 10 million, is a country 3 times more populous than Armenia. Yet it should be remembered that the confrontation was aimed directly at the Artsakh Republic, which numbers 150,000 people. This shows the disproportion faced by the Artsakh Armenians. Moreover, Baku, as one of Turkic nations, has very close relations with Ankara. Abulfaz Elchibey, the president of Azerbaijan in early 1990s, advocated the one nation, two states model of cooperation. Recep Tayyip Erdogan, the current president of Turkey, now returned to this slogan, declaring his full support for Baku in this conflict. At the same time, he called Armenia the greatest threat to the peace in the region. In the 1990s, Turkey was unable to play a significant role in this conflict. Today, at the time when the world and regional order is cracking in many places, Ankara wants to be a major player without which it is impossible to establish a stable security architecture throughout the Mediterranean. The Russian card remained the strongest on the Yerevan side. In the city of Gyumri, 120 kilometers north of Yerevan, the Russians have the 102nd military base, where the Russian Air Force with 3,000 to 5,000 personnel and soldiers are stationed. Armenia also belongs to the Russian NATO, that is to the Collective Security Treaty Organization. This alliance has the equivalent of NATO's Article 5, so an attack on one of its members is considered an attack on the entire organization. Baku, despite solid relations with Moscow, is not part of the alliance. However, it should be remembered that officially the attack has not been aimed directly at Armenia, so Russia theoretically wasn't obliged to provide aid. In practice, Yerevan's expectations of Moscow, which has ruled the area for 200 years, were clear: diplomatic, financial and above all, military aid to Artsakh. At stake were not only regional stability and retaining influence, but also Russia's credibility as an ally in the eyes of other Eurasian heartland countries. And it must be remembered that the military strength card is in reality the only strong card in Moscow's deck, on which the entire perception of strength of the Russian Federation persists. The Kremlin's worst-case scenario is to raise doubts about its agency. This is where the problems for both Moscow and Yerevan began. The geography of the region makes providing such assistance extremely difficult. Georgia is an important player in the puzzle. The only land routes connecting Armenia with Russia pass through Georgia's territory. As the goal of Baku was to destroy the enemy's military potential and force a surrender, it became a natural strategy to cut communication lines connecting Artsakh with Russia, so in practice to exclude the territory of Georgia. This goal was achieved by Baku on October 3rd, as Tbilisi announced that its territory was close to both sides of the conflict, de facto hitting only the Armenians. There was still a road through northern Iran that leaned towards Armenia in this conflict. However, what is important, 1/6 and according to unofficial estimates up to 1/3 of Iran's population are Azeris, who mostly live in its northern part. Thus, we could hear about demonstrations by the Azeri minority demanding the closure of the northern border between Iran and Armenia, which would mean a full blockade. In theory, Azerbaijan also seemed to be blocked, but the Russian media have accused Baku of planned operations and stockpiling of ammunition several months before the escalation. Given the conflict scenario, such presumptions are not without logic. The more so because a few months before the war, large Turkish-Azerbaijani exercises took place in Azerbaijan. The Turks left, among others, F-16 fighters in Azerbaijan. In fact, it is Moscow's expansionist policy that pulled Yerevan down. It is no secret that Tbilisi, with its key decision, wanted to hit Russia. Unofficial information says that Turkey has obtained Georgia's approval to fly its cargo planes to Azerbaijan. Armenia also accused Ukraine of supporting Baku as a channel for supply of spare parts and ammunition. The conflicting interests of Kiev and Moscow also seem clear here. As if that was not enough, despite being closer than with Armenia, Russia has good bilateral relations with Azerbaijan, so to speak out against Baku would mean their immediate break. Proxy or not? One must be careful also in rashly considering the conflict in Nagorno-Karabakh as a proxy war between Turkey and Russia. The interests of these countries are inevitably clashing here, but Ankara has taken many more multi-vectored offensive actions. Although Erdogan clearly declared the possibility of military interference in the conflict, Putin continued to describe the Turkish president as a decisive and flexible partner with whom it is nice to cooperate. Ankara and Moscow are already clashing on many fronts. Libya, Syria, plus the Turks have recently been trying to tighten their relations with Ukraine. Another addition of this rivalry was not convenient for Putin, all the more so it was being done on Ankara's initiative, and it was the Turks who controlled this game to a large extent. Erdogan wants Turkey's presence in this area not to be ignored, pushing out Moscow's sphere of influence. One such sign could be the inclusion of Ankara as one of the chairmen of the OSCE Minsk Group, the international body for the resolution of the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict. At the moment, those countries are Russia, France, and the United States. The presence of Turkey in the format would fulfill one of Baku's postulates and would be a strong concession by Moscow to Ankara. The lack of description of the US influence on Artsakh is also a sign of the times. Washington used to be involved in almost all continuous issues in the world by acting as a mediator. Theoretically, it is in the Minsk group. In practice, however, the United States is distancing itself from this war. The American administration, preoccupied with elections, internal problems and strategic rivalry with China, has begun to let go of less important foreign policy directions. The Nagorno-Karabakh conflict clearly shows this. As a result, a safety vacuum is again starting to form in many places around the world, and Ankara is trying to immediately exploit this vacuum with its aggressive regional policy. In turn, the apathy of the European Union seems to require no comment. Hybrid war. What was the situation on the ground? How did this war even begin? According to Azerbaijan's President Aliyev, Baku responded to Armenia's provocations, yet the real cause was a change in the regional balance of power, which was to be shown by the fait accompli method. Aliyev himself admitted this in an interview. According to information coming from the region, Azerbaijani troops had been mobilized a week earlier. Military activities were also preceded by the difficult situation in Armenia in connection with the coronavirus pandemic, as a result of which the country was in a state of actual isolation. Recently, there have also been many resignations in Armenian law enforcement departments, which could suggest internal chaos and favor a potential Azerbaijani offensive. Many experts believe that the fighting itself had all the hallmarks of a new generation of war, otherwise known as a hybrid war. Baku's initial goal was to take control over the air domain. Already at the start, many OSA anti-aircraft batteries were destroyed using combat drones and circulating ammunition. To this end, Azerbaijan used the Israeli Harpia kamikaze drone system. Similarly, drones were efficiently used to destroy Artsakh artillery, which created an asymmetry of losses for both sides. The demonstration of the Turkish F-16 in the battle prevented Yerevan from using the Russian Su-30 fighters remaining in their arsenal. Moreover, Azerbaijan, using the Israeli LoRa missile systems, cut communication lines connecting Artsakh with the proper Armenia, thus selectively chose the main areas of operation. The southern areas near the border with Iran have become these, for many reasons. Among other things, there are sparsely populated areas, so the risk of losses among civilians is lower. Furthermore, Baku had a military advantage in the southern plains as opposed to the strongly fortified positions in the mountains. At the same time, Azerbaijan cut Artsakh off from Iran, which was one of the potential allied destinations. The conflict also highlighted mistakes in Armenia's army modernization policy in recent years. Yerevan decided to purchase very expensive Russian fighters and S-300 systems. These are the proverbial white elephants that serve more to enhance one's prestige. In the present situation, their loss would be extremely costly and accelerate defeat. To be precise, Armenia has occasionally used the S-300, but using extremely expensive rockets to fight small drones is a short-sighted strategy. Russian experts believe that the funds for the modernization could have been allocated to the Orlan 10 or Forprost-R unmanned vehicles, which would be more effective in Artsakh. Similarly, the two S-19 and S-19M2 self-propelled howitzers would be much better. This is a lesson for all decision makers to allocate funds for modernization into systems tailored to precisely defined tactical scenarios. Yerevan did not do this and paid a high price for it. Baku's meticulously thought-out war of destruction resulted in asymmetrical losses for both sides. Being in a terrible situation, Armenia attempted to escalate the conflict by attacking civilian targets in Azerbaijan, probably counting on a symmetrical retaliation by Baku against targets in the proper Armenia, which would lead to the case of Moscow joining the war. However, here Baku pursued a strategy of strategic restraint.
Protests in Armenia have continued in opposition to a peace deal with Azerbaijan.
On November 10th, the world was informed that Armenia and Azerbaijan had signed a ceasefire. Truce was announced shortly after the Azerbaijani occupation of the key city of Shusha, from where the Azerbaijanis were already one step away from the capital, Stepanakert. Nikol Pashinyan, Armenia's prime minister, said that the terms of the truce are extremely painful, which heralds the fulfillment of all Baku's demands. Although we have entered the era of drone domination on the battlefield, this does not mean that the traditional geostrategic calculation has ceded to count. Still, the overriding goal is to capture and hold enemy territory, maintain strategically important points and your own lines of communication while cutting through those of your opponent. The goal of the war remains the achievement of the political goals set before the conflict. Azerbaijan, following a precisely defined scenario, gradually achieved its goals from the very beginning and as a result won the war. Yerevan, on the other hand, paid a high price for the mistakes of its modernization policy in recent years and trusted too much in its sole guarantor, Russia. It was not the first time that it turned out that the interests of the official allies often remained divergent and that the autonomous defense capabilities should always be sought. This is a lesson for every policymaker, especially in the turbulent 20s of the 20th century. Hey there, Thank you for your time. Please consider supporting the channel on Patreon. Also remember to leave a comment or a like button for the algorithms. More reports are coming soon. Take care.